All right, welcome back to another episode, my ghouls and goblins. We are in chapter 9 this week. We are going to talk about a couple of different things going on in the country at this time. There's kind of a chapter where we tie up some loose ends of various different, like I said, ideas or movements or eras, if you will, going on within these early 1800s. Let's start talking about it. We're going to start talking more about sectionalizing the North versus the South. So speaking about the North, we see a market revolution really start to begin during this time period. Now, the market revolution, we're going to see what that means in a second, but we're really starting to see the commercialization of America with factories and so on. The North is going to experience that Industrial Revolution. Now, if you remember from the last few weeks, the Industrial Revolution was something that was a mistake, but it was an unintentional consequence, if you will, because of the Embargo Act in 1807 by Thomas Jefferson. So he didn't mean to prompt this, however, it does begin. What's going on the West as we are increasing the amount of people heading out west? We see a lot of people going out west specifically for agriculture, right, for farming, to grow wheat, livestock, etc. And the South, the South, their story has been the same since the very beginning, since the colonies, and that's they are still a cash crop economy, basing it off of things like tobacco, sugar, but now there's another crop starting to become more popular, which we're going to talk about in this chapter. So technology and transportation are improving. We're going to see exactly what improvements those are in the next few minutes. We're going to see population increasing. So this is the first, I don't want to say baby boom, if you will, of our country, but you're definitely going to see a lot more people in our country, not just because of the natural birth rate, but because you also see an influx of immigrants for the first time in our country. When I say for the first time, I mean the large influx, okay, a huge flood, if you will. The growth of certain cities, New York has always kind of been there, but now we're going to see New York really take off because of something. Chicago is also going to take off in New Orleans. And all these cities are really going to become very, very crowded very quickly because of something that we'll have to mention in the next few minutes. Western expansion. The problem is the further out west we go, we still have some issues like with Missouri in last chapter, where we want to know, are those places going to be slave or free states? And economic changes, okay, that have impact on migration patterns. We'll talk about where people are moving in the country during this time and its impact on class relations, family, and gender relations. Let's talk about some of the technological improvements that are specifically going on in our country during this time. These couple right here are helping places in the South, our agricultural-based centers. So Cyrus McCormick invents the McCormick Reaper. That's up on the top there, 1830. This basically you would see in the field cutting and gathering crops. Again, if you've been on a farm or you drive down south more specifically, you would see certain tractors that kind of look like this today. They cut and gather crops instead of picking or cutting individual crops. John Deere, okay, a company very popular today. John Deere, the inventor, okay, he was a person. He invents the steel plow in 1837, and that's the picture at the bottom of the slide there. It breaks through the soil, so it helps your, farmers able to cultivate and stir up the soil so that they can seed or sow the land. Consequences. What you're going to see with these inventions is you're going to see less subsistence farming and more large-scale farming. So these inventions are going to allow people to farm greater pieces of land, and you're going to see more plantations, whereas you're going to see less and less of people just farming for their family and more people farming for a market. Again, which we'll talk about more in the next few minutes. So there's demand for more land. The problem is, where is more land? It's going to be westward. So again, as we head out westward in these next few chapters, we're going to see manifest destiny, and we're going to see a problem with slavery. And you're also going to see, the need for these farmers to get their goods from point A to point B. So how are they going to do that? And we'll answer that question within this chapter. So other new technologies, more specifically technologies that are going to help those northern manufacturers. You're going to see factories pop up, and we'll see what factory is in a few moments. Machines replacing people, and factories replacing homes as where people are building or making these finished goods. Some examples of machines in the north, we have the spinning jenny. Okay, that's what you see on the top right hand corner of your slide here. It spins several threads at once to basically create a spool of yarn, which then can be made into a textile or clothing. The cotton gin is a huge one. We're going to talk more about that, but the cotton gin is something invented that's going to have a huge effect on cotton. Not picking cotton, but more specifically how to take the seeds. So a few moments ago, I mentioned that factories are going to replace homes. So let's explore factories and where they really come from. Samuel Slater is considered the father of the factory system. In the 1790s, what he does is he comes over from England and he memorizes the layout of a factory in England, and he is not allowed to travel with such blueprints, but he memorizes them. And he comes over to America and he starts setting up factories, and we kind of take and steal the idea from him to build these factories all throughout the northern cities in America. Now, Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney is a huge inventor. There's two things that we're really going to talk about him in this chapter. Not only did he invent the cotton gin, which we're going to mention more about, but Eli Whitney also invents an idea called interchangeable parts. And this is a huge idea, and it's a very simple idea that we probably take for granted today. So I always tell my students this: what do we do when a light bulb goes out? We go out and get another one and plug it right in. Okay, simple, ready to go. What happens when a light goes out on your, tail light on your car? You go out and you go and buy another one. You put it right in, ready to go. This is called interchangeable parts. This means any machine, any device is made with the intention that if something breaks or something is, done or used up, we are able to or have the ability to go out and buy a part and plug it right back in and the machine works again. What happened or what used to happen before this idea of interchangeable parts is a machine was built unique, meaning that if something broke on that machine, you would have two options. One, you'd have to recreate a part that was specific for that machine, or you would have to rebuild a machine. Okay, and that's obviously not very feasible and obviously not cost effective. So Eli Whitney says, why don't we build machines, universally, where something breaks, we can essentially just replace that part and we're right back in business. This makes for much more efficient use of your time and obviously money and parts. Another inventor, Samuel Morse. Okay, at the bottom of the screen there, the bottom right, you see the telegraph. This is going to revolutionize communication. So it's basically instant communication with a telegraph. You do not hear the person's voice on the phone, but instead of the receiver, you hear a series of beeps. And those beeps, there was a code, and it was called Morse code, and you had to decipher those beeps into a message. This revolutionizes communication where you can pretty much communicate with people pretty instantly. But again, you're not hearing their voice, you're just hearing a code in which you have to decipher it. So it still takes time to decipher that message unless you really know Morse code very well. Now, factories in the beginning are going to be built by rivers because they were run off of water. As time progresses, as we see, electricity and such, we're going to see factories being able to be built anywhere. But in the beginning, okay, water, rivers, running water with a huge, water wheel will propel machines in the factories. But again, as time progresses, as we see things with steam engines and electricity, we will revolutionize factories even further. But in the beginning, these capitalists built factories by water. We mentioned Sam Slater and his idea of the factory system. Now, speaking about factories, this guy, Francis Cabot Lowell, not only does he have sweet mutton chops there, but he invents an idea. He comes up with a really brilliant idea, and his idea is for cheap labor. So what he does is his factory in Lowell, Massachusetts, he is known for hiring young women specifically because women are not only not equivalent, if you will, on the social hierarchy of things. Okay, they're not equal to men, which means that he's able to pay them less money, and so paying them less money saves him money, obviously. He also hires women for the other reason that physically women are usually smaller. And so if a machine or something in a machine breaks, women can climb into the machine and grab or fix it, or whatever they can do. And so he comes up with this idea and he hires these women, which are referred to as the Lowell girls. And this is a kind of a revolutionary idea here in America. And obviously many factories will do the same from here on out. And obviously, when I'm saying I feel that women are, when I mentioned before, women were not viewed as a social hierarchy equals, that's not my belief. That is the belief of society at this time. So speaking of the Lowell system, and over time, what you're going to see is workers start to demand, rights because they want to be equal, they want equal pay and things like that, especially women. And you're going to start to see something called unions form. Now, unions are a group of workers, and they are usually grouped together, and because they're powerful in larger numbers. And unions we're gonna talk way more about unions after the Civil War, but the unions, they start to get their start around this time period, 1830s, 40s, 50s, and a court case called Commonwealth versus Hunt was in the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and it does rule that saying that labor unions are allowed. So we'll pause the story on labor unions for right now, but just know that they're allowed, they are legal, and we'll get more into those in the future weeks to come. So stay tuned. Regardless, factories and what they produce, this gives the North a huge, unique advantage when it comes time for the Civil War. We'll be talking more about this in the next few weeks as well. However, having factories that produce finished goods is very helpful when it comes time to wage war. Anything else? These people in the factories, these workers, besides women, we're also going to see children. We'll see that on a future slide in a minute. But a lot of these people are considered wage slaves, meaning, yeah, they're not slaves. They earn money, but they're wage slaves. They really don't earn a lot. And these low wages and dangerous conditions are really going to be what labor unions are going to go after in the decades to come. So besides women and children mostly working in these factories, you also are going to see people like immigrants work in factories. And immigrants, our country is a history of immigrants, and we are really going to start to see now here in the 1840s our first major wave of immigration. So why immigrants? Why did they come to America? What are their push and pull factors? Well, one of the reasons that you see a lot of immigrants come to the country during this time period in particular is jobs. That's usually true of any period of history, and that's jobs, where specifically we see jobs in the northern factories. You do not see immigrants going to the South for jobs because remember, what's the labor source in the South on the plantations? Slavery, right? So you aren't going to see these immigrants go to the South. You will see some immigrants go out west for land because obviously the land in Europe is, limited. So you will see some immigrants head out there. But mostly immigrants during this time period are heading towards those New Yorks, those Philadelphias, those Chicagos, New Orleans, because of factories, because of the jobs there. You really are going to see the Irish come in the 1840s because of the Irish potato famine. If you remember back to last year, what happens there. So the Irish potato famine forced a lot of Irish out of the country to places like Canada, America, Australia, etc. You are going to see a large influx of Irish immigrants, particularly in New York City and also Boston. This is still true today. So if you go to certain places in New York City, or if you go to Boston today, there is a lot of Irish influence there still to this day. You are going to see most of the immigrants work for low wages, as we've kind of mentioned this already. You are going to see them be victims of prejudice. Now, this is not just true of Irish immigrants, but really of any immigrants of any time period in our history. This prejudice against immigrants, because Americans always feel as if that they are stealing their jobs. Meanwhile, sometimes they're taking jobs that are so low paying and so undesirable by many Americans. What are they really stealing? But besides the point. You are going to see a lot of people not like these Irish immigrants because they are Catholics. And remember, the main predominant religion of America is Protestant. And these Catholics, these Irish Catholics, are not going to be received very well. And you're going to see people, lash out against these Irish immigrants, as we'll see in a moment. So Irish immigrants in particular are going to be very important for the Democratic Party. We'll talk more about the formation of the Democrats in the next chapter, so keep that in mind. But the Democrats are going to really be an immigrant accepting political party. And we'll talk more about what Tammany Hall is in the chapters following the Civil War. But Tammany Hall in New York is going to be what we call a political machine, which means they just produce politicians that stay in power, and they really thrive off immigrants. And we'll have to see why that is in the next few chapters. German immigrants are also coming to the country during this time period. They're a very extremely diverse people. They're not a country just yet. So back to last year, you learn about this time period of nationalization. So you see a lot of people leaving Germany, not wanting to be part of Otto von Bismarck and his plans for this new Germany. There's a mix of religions. You see some Jewish people, you see Protestants, maybe some Catholics leaving this area in Europe. Variety of social classes and occupations. You'll see German immigrants go to the cities to work. You'll see some German immigrants go out to the west for land. So, again, very diverse group. You can't really just pin it or generalize them as one group. So, mentioning immigrants brings us to the prejudice of native-born Americans towards these immigrants. Now, I'm not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about native-born Americans, people that were born here in America and believe that they are native to America. And they feel very prejudiced towards these, immigration groups, like we said, because they're taking their jobs, because of the religious differences. And we're going to call them nativists. Okay, nativists are a dangerous group. I always ask my students this: are people still nativists today? Are people still prejudiced towards immigrants today? And, yeah, unfortunately they are. There's still a lot of prejudice towards immigrants today. If you follow any current events, immigration is still in our news today, which is obviously very sad. We're talking about, a long time ago. We're talking the 1830s and 40s, and we're still talking about this almost 200 years later. But anyways, in the future chapter, we'll mention the Know Nothing Party. The Know Nothing Party is a political party specifically dedicated to nativist ideals, where they're anti-immigrant. And we'll talk more about them in the future. But America was becoming more ethnically and racially diverse, and the nativists are just not handling it very well. We're starting to see the formation of economic systems, the northern factories, the southern plantations still there. Now the West is a mix. The West has some factories, places like Chicago, and you're going to see also the West be a place for land, where the immigrants can go out and buy land, as we head further and further west. So a lot of regional economic and political differences as we're talking more about this idea of sectionalism, okay, as we head into, the Civil War. Okay, now before I kind of said we would talk about this a little bit more, Eli Whitney, we talked about interchangeable parts before, this efficient idea. One of the biggest things Eli Whitney is really known for is his invention of this little device on your slide right here. It's called the cotton gin. Now, the cotton gin, this little machine, makes the process of taking seeds out of cotton faster, about 50 times faster. So now it does not pick cotton, okay, but instead it takes the seeds out of cotton. This was invented by Eli Whitney because he felt that this would make the job of slaves easier. So that was his intention. And he's right, it does make their job easier. However, here's the consequence. Because the job of slaves was made easier, you start to see the demand for cotton increase. And if you know anything about supply and demand, when demand increases, you have to increase your supply. So now there's a greater demand for cotton, which means we need more people to pick cotton, which means this is going to lead to the expansion of slavery. So our forefathers, they said, you know what, slavery is a dying thing, it's going to die out eventually, and so they actually put in the Constitution that slavery was protected because they truly believed slavery was dying out, and it was. All the northern states by the 1800s, the early 1800s, they were done with slavery. But this little invention actually causes that trend to take a reverse. And not that the northern states are going to reintroduce slavery, but now the South is going to expand the slave trade in between the states. Now, we are no longer going to be taking slaves from Africa. That's done. However, you're going to see the breeding really of slaves in the South because they need more slaves. And that's all due to this little device. Eli Whitney thought he was going to create a device to help slaves in their job. However, he probably makes it worse because you're going to see slavery explode now in the early 1800s because now the demand for cotton rises. So this little device has a huge impact. You can even say it started the Civil War, if you will. Okay, let's talk more about the West and what leads people out west. There's an abundance of land, and being there's abundance of land and people want to go out there, we have to make their journey out there easier. And so you're going to see the invention of things like turnpikes, which are just roads in which you would pay a toll to continue traveling on that road. If you ever traveled out of state, you've done this before, you've had an easy pass, or you pay some money to go on that road, like the Jersey Turnpike. Corduroy roads, like in this picture below, in which you see the swampy areas in our country that were not very feasible for roads. What they would do is they cut down trees and they lay them down across that muddy area, and you would take your carriage and drive across it, and that would make for a very bumpy ride, as you can imagine. Other things, the steamboat by Robert Fulton. He puts a steam engine on a boat instead of relying on winds to propel your boat. You now have an engine. Obviously, now you can travel in both directions a little bit easier. And also, this has huge implications on trade. So if you make the process of taking my goods from point A to point B faster, well, then the cost of that trip is going to go down, which means you're actually going to see the cost of goods decrease, which is good. That's right for the consumer. That's a good thing. Transcontinental Railroad that's going to start being constructed in the 1830s and 40s and really take off in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and even afterwards. And the Transcontinental Railroad also has a huge impact on people heading out west and also trade. Again, helping trade costs go down, and the railroad allows people to go further west at a very quick pace. So that also has a huge impact. Our very first national road is called the Cumberland Road. That stretched from about Maryland, Cumberland, Maryland, which is on the East Coast, goes through modern day West Virginia, and goes all the way out to Illinois, which is at that time pretty far west. And this was our very first national road. Today we have many national roads, but this was our very first one. We're trying to connect the country here because we want people to feel connected throughout all the different regions of our growing country here. And here's just a picture of the Cumberland Road from Maryland all the way out to Illinois. One other thing that helps connect the country is the Erie Canal. Now, a canal is a man-made waterway. This was built in upstate New York. It connected the Hudson River to Lake Erie. Now, this was done because what it could do is it allowed traders to go into New York, okay, from Europe, let's say. Goods come into New York, and then they can travel up the Hudson River, across the Erie Canal, into the Great Lakes, and then the Great Lakes connect to the Mississippi River, and you're connecting the whole country now, from New York to New Orleans, in the same waterway. This has a huge impact on trade, reduces the time of travel for trade, and again, also helps costs by cutting them greatly. All right, and the Erie Canal, just some pictures there, what it looks like. And again, the Erie Canal is in upstate New York, and you can see that here where it runs. So speaking about all these, technological and transportation improvements, you can see how by 1830, where people are moving out west, we're no longer stuck on the East Coast. We're heading out into these, old Northwest and even past the Mississippi River now into Missouri and other Louisiana territory. All right, so westward expansion by 1830, we're definitely heading out further, west. So let's finish up this chapter, just catching up on a couple of ideas that we talked about thus far. We talked about Southern cotton is really going to be, the next big cash crop, and the invention that allows cotton to really expand and also slavery expand is the cotton gin. So they increase the internal slave trade, okay? Keyword internal. Transformation from subsistence to these plantation economies where we're no longer just seeing farmers have a plantation for or having a farm to provide for their family. You're starting to see farmers get into the commercial industry and sell on a mass market, and their mass markets rely upon being connected to those northern manufacturers through the Transcontinental Railroad, through the Cumberland Road, through the Erie Canal and the Mississippi River. So remember that these farmers are now seeing success, yes, because of the advancements in their technologies, but also because they're being connected to those markets back east. And you start to see the family dynamics change in certain places throughout the country. Women, leaving the home and going into factories to work a little bit. The cult of domesticity is still there. They're still expected by society to be at home, but you still see young women getting these jobs, and that's pretty revolutionary for the role of women thus far. All right, that's where we're going to stop for today. That is chapter 9, tying up some of these quick, little ideas throughout our 1820s, 30s, and 40s. Hopefully this helps your understanding of Chapter 9. Give it a like or subscribe. Until next time, be good.